welcome to today's episode of the Force of Nature podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Woody Lane from Oregon in the United States. Woody is a livestock nutritionist and forest specialist living in Rosenberg, Oregon, and he's written a couple of books and done a lot of extension in America and in some other places around the world. How are you today, Woody?
Kind of just fine. Our weather, I think, is very similar to yours, and we're hoping it rains a little more because we're getting towards. We need more rain. That's what we do. Our climate's kind of similar to yours, and we need the rain now. So because the summer is dry as a bone. So we get the rain now and get snow in the mountains, we'll feel a little safer. We get more forage, it'll last longer, and also the fire season will be a lot shorter. Yeah.
Do you get quite a decent fire season consistently in Oregon? Yeah.
And it's getting worse, as you can imagine. It is getting worse. It's longer, and there have been bigger fires than in any time in history.
Yeah.
And fires will be, I don't know if you're talking acres or hectares, whichever you're comfortable with, but 150,000 acres is a large fire.
Yeah, no, that is a very big fire. And we definitely saw more this past summer and here in the South Island. It's just been weather change, weather systems to El Nino, and it's dried things right out. We just saw fires spiking up everywhere, but not to the same scale as you.
In our discussion groups, the farmer rancher discussion groups that I've been running, one of the main topic is what happens when a fire is getting close. Yeah. What are you going to do with the animals? What type of arrangements do you need to get ready? Ready, set, go. What happens? And especially if you have dairy. I mean, what do you do with 150, 200 milking cows? So those are actual serious discussions that we've never had before.
Yeah, and I'd say that's probably discussions that are never really had in New Zealand. No one does any planning for big fires coming through. And it may be something that people should be considering, especially with a dry summers that we're having at the moment, and it might continue into the future. So do you want to give us a bit of a background on how you've got to where you are, and I guess how you got into agriculture as well?
Well, I can blame you I blame New Zealand for getting me into agriculture. I'll tell you that. I grew up in a city on the East Coast. I grew up in New York City, just a couple of miles from a well-known politician. I went to school there and whatever in downtown, and I had skills in things like riding subways and jaywalking and things of that nature, which you do in big cities, right? Yeah. But I went to college and got a bachelor's degree in biological science. But then I joined something called the American Peace Corps, and I was in Malaysia, which is a volunteer organization, especially for people just coming out of college or whatever. And I joined that and was there for 2.5 years. And at the end of that, I was supposed to go back to the United States, but I was dealing with a lot of farmers. I was on the island of Borneo, and there were farmers there, rice farmers, and so I had some animals. But I kind of really wanted to. That seemed to be a very valuable thing to do, to go into that, to do that as a profession. But I had no idea how. You grew up in a city. What do you know? And I, when I left there, which of course is near Singapore for those who are not familiar with the geography, it's there. I routed myself down to Auckland because I knew somebody who was living in Auckland, and then Rotorua. And for the next 6 months, spent time in New Zealand, hitchhike. This is back then. It wasn't fancy. It was a backpack and hitchhiking, and staying in youth hostels and wherever I could. And I got onto some farms and talked my way on and say, I just want to learn, and could I be here? My first time I was actually on a regular farm. I was mowing. I was hoeing tomatoes on a farm, on a dairy farm. It was a 10-acre field. You know how big 10 acres is? It's about the size of Russia. When you're doing it like that. It was midsummer, and I worked on farms, and then they were dairy. It was a dairy, and I truly loved being near animals and working things. And I worked on a farm down near Invercargill, and another one up in King Country in Otahanga. And when I was there, it was the week of shearing, so I was rouseabout for a week, and it's a good thing because I didn't know much else what to do, and I learned a lot about just being around. And when I got back to the United States, I did some other stuff for 2 years, but then enrolled in at the university to learn. Actually, I wanted to learn how to drive a tractor, but the university was Cornell, and Cornell University, they don't teach you how to drive a tractor. You become a scientist, which is what I did. I earned a master's degree there, and then worked in livestock nutrition, and then worked in West Virginia with beef, cattle, and sheep farmers on a project there under West Virginia University for a couple of years, and then went back to Cornell and got my doctorate, and did my research for a doctorate for weaning orphan lambs, young lambs, early weaning, and looking at the physiology and biochemistry of it. And from there, after that, I got a job in our upper Midwest in Wisconsin as the state extension beef, cattle, and sheep nutrition position. So I was providing information to the different what we call counties, areas, the extension people there, and giving hundreds of talks and making. I even made videos back then. They were very simple compared to the technology today. It was long before cell phones, and in fact, desktop computers were a new idea back then. Our one of the most highest technology was a fax machine, so it was different. But in 1990, my wife and I moved from Wisconsin to Oregon, and I've been there ever since. And I've been developing my own, working for myself and as a consultant, working with some national organizations, doing direct consulting, meaning going to farms and stuff, and then developed my own courses to teach forage and nutrition and beef cattle production and sheep production. And the ones that really took off the most were the forages, grazing courses. And I've done many of those. Those are like 10 weeks long, once a week for 3 hours. And we set up, it wasn't on the university, it was self-made. So people would pay me, and I do the advertising and whatever. And there'd be 30 to 40 farmers that come to that. And we would be going through the principles and then pasture walks or whatever at the same time. And I did that for, till before COVID. That's when I stopped. And other workshops. Of course, I've been doing workshops around our country, and in fact, came to New Zealand a couple of times as well. On our honeymoon, we back in late 1980s, I knew some friends there, and gave a seminar at Massey on our honeymoon. And while I was also in the States, what we developed was what you would call discussion groups, which became a very big part of what I do, is that I developed 3 of them. In Oregon, if we said, they do this in New Zealand, and this is a very good thing, there'll be a kiss of death here. Farmers and ranchers are very proud. They don't want to copy somebody else. What happened, though, was that the system that developed was parallel. It was exactly the same because the system works. And we developed it. And in 2001, right after 9/11, I came to Christchurch for the World Sheep and Wool Congress. And I was there and gave talks there, and then spent another 3 weeks driving around South Island, through the Catlins and over to Invercargill and all places, and went with a couple of facilitators to their groups. And I was so impressed in a way because it was exactly the same as ours. It was run for about the same length of time, and then afterwards you go inside, and then you have a discussion, or go inside or you get together and you have a discussion, and then you end. Except the difference is that when the groups ended there in South Island, they'd break out the beer, and in our case we didn't do that. But the parallel was phenomenal, and I think it's not an accident because that system works very, very well. And so how you all developed it long before us, good 10 years before us, and was very successful, has been very successful. We started to develop it here, and it was a very successful for the members. I mean, you could tell the difference when you go by a person's farm if they're in these discussion groups or not, just by looking at the pastures. So that's I've been able to cobble together a way of doing things, and without the trying to deal with an overhead of administrative, all that type of stuff that deans and board of directors and all that tells you what you can or can't do. I did it myself. And I've been doing that ever since. And in the process was also writing magazine articles. And I have been a columnist for an American magazine called The Shepherd, which is a national magazine. And I've been writing a column there called From the Feed Trough since the early 90s. And in the last few years, I have collected those and rewritten those articles. They're about 1,000 words, 1,500 words, and compiled 3 books, one on nutrition and 2 on forages and pastures, and grazing. And they're now available. And they're selling in Australia and New Zealand. I know that because I get royalties. I mean, not enough to retire on, don't get me wrong, but a little bit.
I've got your second one now.
You got the second one. Okay.
Yep. Came last week.
That's it.
Very quickly. So rest of the week.
It's going to be hard to sign that. I could write it from here, but I don't think that work. That has been a real joy, because way back when I was in college, before I ever got into agriculture, I had these dreams of being perhaps a writer. And of course, one thing leads to another in life, and you never get there. But now I've been doing it, so it's been a real. I thought I was writing the great novel that never happened ever, but I have been able to produce 3 books of what I think is good information, written so that people can read it and enjoy it. The second book has a chapter on dinosaur nutrition, which is but if you think about it, dinosaurs grazed. The big ones, we're talking, the huge ones with the long necks, right? They grazed. And if they grazed, I mean, they might have been leaves up high, whatever, but they grazed. Those are leaves in plants. They have fiber. And how do you get nutrients out of fiber? Well, you need to have some fermentation sac somewhere, because they don't have enzymes to do. We don't have enzymes to digest cellulose, but bacteria and protozoa in the rumen do. And in our tract, or lower tract, they call the microbiome. That's the common term now, but it's the same thing that goes on inside the rumen. And sheep and cattle, and deer and goats are all ruminants. And what they do is they derive nutrition from parts of plants that we can't. I mean, we cannot live on lucerne hay. It won't work. We eat a little bit, and there's a little bit of digestion of fiber in our lower tract, but not much, and you couldn't live on enough of it. But and horses, which are not ruminants, but they have a large place in the large intestine where there's all that fermentation goes on, they have evolved to do that. And ruminants, sheep and cattle particularly, are exquisitely designed to extract the most amount of nutrients from fibrous plants. And if you take that and go, well, wait a moment, these dinosaurs ate it. How do they do that? Well, it kind of allows you to theorize in a very interesting way.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that good fermentation has to exist in at least, I don't know, I can't translate it fast enough, it needs to be about 50 or 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Mm-hmm. All right. That's good. Dinosaurs are reptiles, or reptile-like animals, and they're cold-blooded.
Yeah.
How they get that warmth makes you kind of think a little bit. So that was one of my chapters. It's kind of a thinking chapter. What if? But the rest of them have to do with, putting animals out, and how do you make measurements. And one of the things I teach here is that in the American system of pasture management comes from the agronomic sessions, people who do plants. I mean, the agronomy department or crop science department, whatever it's called. And those recommendations are based on going out, looking at the pastures and say, oh, how many inches is it? Put your animals, let's say you've got tall fescue, cocksfoot, we call it orchard grass, but a cocksfoot paddock. All right? When do you put your animals out? When do you take them off? Okay, you put them on. A typical recommendation that you'd see, or in writing, would be put them on at 9 or 10 inches, take them off at 3 or 4 inches.
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. Then my question, I'm a trained nutritionist. So my question is, if you have ewes in early lactation and they're raising twins, all right, let's say you have a 80 kilogram ewe, heavy ewe, all right, out on pasture and raising twins, and it's early lactation. She just lambed, a month ago. My question is, how many inches is that you need to meet her nutrient requirements?
Exactly.
Because if you can't, I mean, usually when I ask that question to farmers, I get this response going like what we call a deer in the headlight look.
Yeah.
You see a deer on the road and it stops and stares at you, and oh my gosh, well, that's the deer in the headlight is a phrase that we use that because no one's ever you didn't think about that. On the other hand, so if you can't answer that question, how do you answer the question? How many before you put the animals out? You got to. Can I use acres?
Yeah, you go.
Talking acres? Okay.
Yeah.
If you got a 10-acre paddock and you got 300 ewes, how long can they stay out there? Because you can't answer that if you're talking inches.
No, that's what I was thinking. And this is a very hard way to measure pasture, and it doesn't account for the density of that pasture.
So what we do is I'm teaching people to, I think you do it there, is that you use how much is out there in terms of mass, how many kilos of feed is out there.
Yeah.
Because if you know how many kilos the animals are going to eat, and you know how many kilos are out there with a residual that you're going to leave it a certain number of kilos, then you can make an estimate in advance before you open the gates.
Yeah.
And when I've taught that here, I could see the eyes open up and going, oh, this makes sense. Because up to then, it doesn't make sense. And then I could build from there how forages grow. And when you're doing intensive type grazing, you know when to put the animals on and when to take them off, and how to judge when you can, and then use those tools to make decisions about your animals and stuff like that, and then go into more extensive things like a grazing wedge and things of that nature. But all those are tools to allow better management of paddocks and know what's going on and have tools to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like any professional wants those tools, and in ranching, in what we call ranching here in the Western United States, anything that's got animals on it's a ranch. You can have 2 horses and a mule and 3 sheep, and that's a ranch. Or you can have 8,000 ewes. I mean, whatever. If you get on a tractor and you are doing something, it's called farming.
Yes.
This is west of the Missouri River in the United States, in the West.
Yeah.
So I'll sometimes use the word ranch, but I don't mean in the desert or in the outback, or that's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about the same type of properties, fenced properties with water, enough natural water to grow stuff, just like it would be in South Island or North Island. I mean, that's a farm.
Yeah.
So, that's just terminology.
I completely understand. So
that's my background.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, very comprehensive. Are you finding that since you've been teaching these, that the general understanding is now going away from the inches model to what we kind of do in New Zealand, which is, no, it's not. So it's still...
Well, not officially.
Okay.
There are some people in the U.S., and I can name some, I won't name them, but people I know in various extension or outreach positions in some way who do use this.
Okay.
But they're the exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
We're still seeing the basic recommendations coming out are still put them on a certain number of inches, take them off a certain number of inches. It's maybe slowly changing. They use a simple, basically as a ruler with some numbers on it, and that says, oh, if you're this high, you put the basically the pasture stick into the sward, and you go, if it's this high, this is how much you got. Well, the way we would do it, and why we did this in discussion groups and also in the classes, is we take we would have a 11.5 by 12 inch, a square. It's not quite square. It's not 12 by 12, but it's 11.5 by 12.
Yeah.
And then you cut it, of course, all the way down to the ground, all that vegetation, and then dry it down in a microwave, and take measurements of how many grams there is. All right, we use a postal scale, so you get number, and you could switch it to grams, so you get how many grams there is. So if you take that particular size of a square, which isn't quite square, it's 11.5 inches by 12 inches.
Yeah.
And you get a number, say 23 grams of dry matter in that.
Mm-hmm.
The mathematics comes out that all you have to do is multiply that number by 100, therefore add 2 zeros.
Yeah.
And that'll give you how many pounds per acre or kilograms per hectare, which are almost the same.
Yeah.
They're 11% difference, but, on farming, you're feeding with a front end loader. 11% you won't notice. So you have basically so if you got 23 grams, it's 2,300 kilograms per hectare. Now, in graduate school in science, they would do 50 of those and take the average, right? That's not what we want, and no farmer in their right mind is going to do that.
Yeah.
And slave labor has been outlawed here in this country for at least 150 years, right? So the thing is that what we do though is when they do that with one thing, they now know what 2,300 pounds of that pasture looks like.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is train their eyes.
Exactly.
And that is that's a good skill. I mean, we do this all the time with animals. I mean, you want to rate the body condition score of a sheep, right? Of a ewe. What do? You put your hand on it and you feel its backbone.
Yeah.
And you're not measuring the actual amount of subcutaneous fat. Of course not.
No.
But you're getting an idea on it, how much is there, but you use your fingers if you do it the right way. Well, you've trained your fingers, and those people who have cattle can look at a cow or steer and put a body condition score on that animal. In the U.S., we use a 1 to 9 thing for cattle and 1 to 5 for sheep. But it's a score. It tells you how fat they are, and you could deal them accordingly. Well, what you're trying to do when we're looking at a paddock is to train your eye so you can walk on it. I mean, you have a gumboot method, I know, which is the same kind of thing. It's not precise. It won't pass a scientific review committee, but we don't need to when you're actually trying to farm. You want to get a reasonable idea and go from there. And then, of course, when you do go from there and you see and you go, there wasn't as much feed as I thought. Well, then you adjust your skills accordingly. Yeah. You do, 10, 20 of those moves, and you have a much better idea what's out there. And every good farmer in New Zealand or the United States who's a good grazer, they do that. Everyone. So, exactly. And they might, but rather than take 50 years to gain that knowledge, if we can do it arithmetically, because that can be done even with a beginning farmer. Yeah. And that's what I've been doing in my classes and things. That's part of what would go through classes, and certainly in our discussion groups, we would go through. People would have clipboards or a piece of paper that would have a soil test on them and the results of soil tests, and then we'd be talking about how much residual would you want on this paddock, or why aren't you doing it this way? And of course, it would be good discussions among farmers together. But it's the type of thing that professional farmers who know what they're doing when it comes to grazing. Yeah, and that's what I've been striving to bring across. And in my writings, if you read my writings in both books of Capturing Sunlight, Book 1 and Book 2, that's the underlying way in which I'm approaching the concept of pasture management.
Yeah, we definitely see here guys that are really good at being able to visually check a paddock, but it's a very small minority. But I guess everyone who's out of, say, in the dairy farming context, who are doing a pasture walk with a plate meter, are kind of getting their eye in and being able to judge for, okay, that says the average cost of the paddock, so that's kind of what it looks like. And if they're doing that weekly, you can train yourself pretty quickly to be able to go past some paddock and go, well, that looks like it's about 200-300 kgs of dry matter as well. Mm-hmm. So it's just getting those repetitions in, isn't it? And just learning what it looks like and getting your eye and your context.
And equating it ultimately to numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
And with those numbers, you can make estimates of how many animals or how much time, whatever. But you've got something to go by instead of, this looks like, I don't know, a couple of weeks. And of course, if you're going to put animals out there for more than 5 or 8 days, 7 days, you're going to be having you basically have a set stocking situation in which the animals are eating regrowth.
Yeah.
And that has all sorts of bad problems with your best forages, because they're the ones that are trying to regrow, your best ones. And you have an animal come by and eat the regrowth, you're putting selection pressure against it.
Definitely. And that's one of my big takeaways from your first Capturing Sunlight book, is that kind of 5-day rule. Do you want to explain that for the listeners?
Sure. The 5-day rule is basically the way I do it for in my classes. I'll ask how many people ever watch grass grow? I mean, really grow.
Well, it rained last week, so I have actually watched it grow in the last week. But before then, it hasn't been done. Yeah.
Well, if you mow the lawn,
yeah.
All right. How long does it take before you start to see green shoots again?
Well, I probably don't watch it close enough to realize that when it's getting close.
Exactly. Most people don't.
Yeah.
But really, you'll start to see stuff in 5 or 6 days.
Yeah.
You will. I'm assuming that it's not dry and you say you got enough water and it's reasonably fertile, you're going to start to see new growth in one way or another in only a few days.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have animals in the same paddock and they're there for those 5 days and they're there, all they're doing is walking around looking for feed.
Yeah. And
if they have a choice between Brussels sprouts and chocolate, which one are they going to choose, right?
Sure.
Well, maybe cattle will be different, but she might be different. But the end result is they will select the best they can, the tastiest, and it will inevitably be younger stuff.
Yeah.
And it'll be the new growth. Well, if animals are in a paddock, if you got enough stock in there, and if the animals are there, they're going to be constantly stressing those regrowing plants. Well, that might not kill the plant, but it does weaken it because when that new growth is coming out, it's coming out of reserves.
Yeah.
You do it a couple of times, and you're suppressing those. You're basically taking it out of the bank account.
Yeah.
And then the next time some nematodes attack it or something like that, they're basically a stressed plant. So over time, you'll lose your best plants in this. So I called it a 5-day rule. In some places it could be 7 or whatever, but a 5-day rule is a very easy thing to remember. Get your animals out of there. And some of the things that are taught in our universities are all sorts of ways of grazing. You put the sheep first, and then the cattle, or you put the young lambs first, and then the ewes, or something like that. Some one following the other, maybe multi-species. They'll call them, and they'll put all sorts of names on it. They'll put forward and revert and backward is grazing. They'll put those are fine. That's nomenclature. That's typical university stuff. I don't care. I want animals out of that paddock in 5 days. You could put 6 different species in there, but you got to do them in 5 days.
Yeah, exactly.
So the idea is to say, I'm sorry?
No, you go.
Save the regrowth.
Yeah.
You save the regrowth and let those plants regrow. And then you can come back when you want to come back, how it fits in your system. But you have to, unless you want to do just the opposite. You want to clean up a paddock, put a lot of stress on those plants without necessarily using Roundup, but just really hammer those plants because you're going to replant it, and you want to seed, and you don't want that seed to come up in a jungle.
Yeah. So
you want to stress those plants, and that's the 5-day rule. And there are obviously times when that's not going to work. Yeah. And if you don't get rain, what are you going to do? But the fact is you have to protect the regrowth if you want healthy plants.
So do you have a rule around the recovery side of things for that plant as well? Like it obviously.
Well, in my books I talked about the forage growth curve, and in fact in the book 1 I have towards the back there's an actual graph. You show it's an S-shaped curve.
Yeah.
Initially when forage is first coming out of the ground, they're small, and they've got a little bit of leaves. So it doesn't have many solar panels. So what those leaves do, of course, is capture sunlight, literally, and then and photosynthesis, what's going on in those leaves, will combine water and CO2 and it becomes a carbohydrate. That's the basic biochemical reaction.
Yeah,
it's really complex under the hood. But the end result is capturing. It takes CO2.
Yeah.
And plus H2O, and you get a carbohydrate, which then goes on becomes sugars and proteins and stuff like that. Well, but it takes leaf area, and initially, all plants come out really, really small.
Yeah.
But then when they start to get a lot more leaf area, so their growth per day is kind of slow. There are additional mass that's out in the paddock. The paddock is increasing the amount, but slowly. But as more and more leaf happens, it gets faster and faster, and the curve, instead of being kind of rising slowly, starts to go very, very fast as you get just nothing but leaf out there. Think of a good paddock of perennial ryegrass.
Yeah.
In the spring. I mean, you get nothing but green leaves, very dense as far as you can see. Well, the amount of dry matter that is being created from the CO2 and H2 and all that photosynthesis is you could be, again, I'm going 120 pounds, 130 pounds a day.
Yeah.
That's 65 kilos of dry matter per hectare, per day.
Yeah.
That would be per acre. In any case, the end result is, I'll do this in pounds per day. That's a huge amount. But then as the plants get higher, the leaves underneath are no longer capturing sunlight because they're in the shade.
Exactly.
So they don't disappear, but the leaves on top are still, creating carbohydrates. So you get increased mass, increased amount of feed, but the growth is not as steep. So it's kind of evening out. It never goes down unless you take stuff away, but the curve looks like an S curve.
Yeah.
And there are three parts of that S curve. There's the beginning low part, there's the middle steep part, and there's the top part, which is kind of not quite leveling out, but it's going up slowly. And those parts we call, phases. And we have phase 1, 2, and 3, which is the low one, the middle one, and the upper one. And what you want to do is keep in phase 2. You put your animals into the top of phase 2, and you take them out at the bottom of phase 2. You don't want the animals to graze so much that you're down into phase 1 as a slow growth period, because it's going to take a lot of time for those plants to recover, even to get into phase 2. And the way we can look at it, it might take another 10 days, 2 weeks before it gets there. So every time you go through a paddock, every time you go through a cycle, if you graze down into phase 1, what happens is that you have to wait till the plants. There's an inefficient, slow growth period that you have to wait on. And that might take 10 days or so, 10 or 15 days. Well, before it gets efficient. Well, if you go through that paddock 3 or 4 times and you lose 10 days each time, you've lost, over the course of a season, you've lost a month of grazing.
Exactly.
So it all fits when you're talking about mass, and the amounts of stuff out there. You have the tools to analyze what's going on out there. You don't even need a piece of paper. You just know that this is going to happen, and then you can manage for it.
Exactly.
You can pull your animals off and know why you're pulling them off. Or conversely, if you have multiple paddocks, right? You got a bunch of different paddocks. They don't all have to be on the same schedule. You might want to graze into phase 1 in the beginning of spring, because you don't want those paddocks to come on just as fast as everyone else, because you got this wave of everyone complains about it. We know about it. In the spring, you're going to get more feed than you can deal with, right? But if you can take that wave and break it up so that the phase 2 parts are at different paddocks, then you can move your animals around accordingly. At least you have more management. Instead of the huge tidal wave of stuff, you can break it up into smaller waves.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can do this with the understanding of what's going on in the paddocks.
Yeah.
Of course, good grazers who've been doing this for a long time, they've known this, but they won't be able to explain it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's having that adaptability to change your grazing practice and not just sticking to one form of grazing and rotation or set stopping.
Well, people do that, and they're always got the same issue. You got too much stuff in the spring.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if you have different species of predominant species in different paddocks, you're going to get slightly different curves.
Yeah.
And then some species are going to be doing better. For example, let's say Timothy, which had been traditionally a really good grass. And if you talk, it's just a perennial, grass. But horse owners think it's the best in the world. The thing is that, at least in the United States, Timothy is well known for producing most of its feed in the spring and not much in the summer. Well, that's one species, But another species, say, for example, cocksfoot, you can have good summer growth, especially with certain cultivars.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is all kind of setting things up and knowing taking advantage of the different characteristics of our forages, and then being able to plan grazing accordingly and know some of the basic rules, so that if you don't, you can either violate them on purpose because you know what's going to happen, or you can use them to your advantage no matter how it cuts.
Yeah.
So that's what my books are about. In one way, that's the main guts of the grazing parts of it and the plant growth, and of course they were written here in the United States, where most of the recommendations are still in inches, how many inches you put out, and that misses all of these subtleties.
Yeah, exactly. And I think your books are very easy to read and understand it the way that you've written it, especially the first one, how it's got the Bible at the back that summarizes how to do each thing. I found it very useful. Even in a New Zealand setting, there was definitely learnings. I think that phase 1, 2, 3 growth, I talked about that on like a social media post, and it was actually surprising how many people like had the click moment, go, oh, I've never really thought about it like that. So it's still, it's very simple to get, but I think it's just the way that it's been, the way that you explain it makes it very easy to understand.
Well, I'm talking when I'm giving talks, I'm not talking in a university setting.
Yeah.
I'm talking with working farmers. Exactly. And I've always said, there's no tests in this class. No surprise quizzes. The real test is when you go to the banker.
Yeah.
You have to have a successful business. And successful can be defined many different ways, but you have to stay in business. And these help give the tools to make better decisions with a paddock. Mm-hmm. That's what we're trying to do, because every farmer all the time has to make decisions. And the decisions are, do I build a fence here or there? Do I use electric fence? Can I afford to put the chargers in, solar chargers? What type of fertilizer? Oh, I just get some limestone. Well, if you don't know what an SMP buffer is, you don't know if you're spending money and you're just dumping in the sink, down the drain. If you don't know what we call a buffer index or an SMP buffer, which is a pH, but it's a lookup number. It's not the pH of the soil. It's it tells you how the soil will respond to limestone, because limestone increases pH. Well, how if you have a soil that's primarily clay and a different soil that's primarily sand, and you put 2 tons of limestone on, which one's going to respond faster, the clay or the sand?
Probably the clay.
No, just the opposite.
Write it up? Oh, that's the sand.
This is assuming it doesn't drain out,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Probably the sand. No, it won't. No, we're talking. No, of course the sand will drain out faster. But limestone, will. The thing about it is that different soils react differently to limestone. Some react faster, some react slower. So it means that if you want to get a pH up a certain amount, on the ones that react slower, you need to add more.
Yeah.
So that you can get it to where you want it to go. If you want to get your pH up to 6 and you're at 5.2, in one case you might need 2 tons of lime per acre. In another case you might need 6. Well, you need to know this number before you spend money. Yeah. Because if you need 5 or 6 tons of lime, you might go, maybe I'll just raise blueberries. Maybe this is not a good place. Or maybe I'll put my money where I can get a good response. Yeah. And don't worry about the other. These are business decisions, but in order to make those business decisions, you've got to have the tools.
Exactly. And I think
that's what
we definitely don't have the buffer index in New Zealand.
You don't?
No. And I was talking to some people about it as well, if they'd heard it, and they weren't familiar with it either.
Well, they could call it different things in some ways. They could call it lime requirement or something of that nature.
Yeah.
Basically what it amounts to is that buffer index or whatever is a lookup number, and all our extension services, every state university puts out a table, a piece of paper with a row by column. And on the left-hand column will be, what's your buffer index? 4.9, 5, 5.2, goes up to 6, 6.5. And then you'll have different columns, and each column is the target in other words, do you want to get to pH 5.2, 5.6, 6, 6.4? There'll be different columns. And the numbers in the boxes will be how much limestone do you need to get there?
Yeah.
So if you have a buffer I'm just making these numbers up. I don't have the thing in front of me. But let's say you had a buffer index of 6. Higher the number is better. Then you might only need 1, and you want to, let's say your buffer index is 5.9 or 6. Let's say it's 6, but your real pH is 5.1. Mm-hmm. That's pretty low, right? Yeah. So the buffer index is 6. That means, and then you take this 6 number and look on the left-hand column, and then you go across to the target column. And let's say you want to get to pH 6. So, and then you just go down and go across and find the box, and it might just say that you need 2 tons of lime.
Yeah.
But what happens if your buffer index is 5.2 and you go across and you want to get to 6? You might need 5 tons of lime.
Yeah.
So it tells you that, but it's kind of regional.
And it's all based on
soils. So a reference chart that comes out of California can't be used in Ohio. The Ohio organization would have to make it. So let's say you would have to do, maybe there's 2 or 3 in North Island and a couple in South Island.
Yeah.
They're just reference tables. They have to be worked out. And that could be translated. The companies themselves, Dalgetty's or whatever, may have done that and produced a lime requirement for that type of soil. Yeah. Has done it for you. So you're not physically doing the lookup. I teach people how to do lookup. But the companies themselves may give you that number. And then you make the choice as to whether or not you want to spend that much money.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it goes at the moment. But it'd be important for
I'm hoping that's what happens.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that's what happens behind the scenes. I don't know, because by teaching the buffer index or SMP buffer is the same thing. Farmers they know how to use those tools, and therefore they can make their judgment.
Yeah.
Instead of just getting the recommendation.
Yeah. The difference here is that the farmer doesn't have those lookup tables, I guess, to go and do that.
Well, neither does an advisor who comes and looks at the paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just in Australia just recently over in Victoria, and I was talking with some farmers, and they showed me their soil tests. And you're right, there was no buffer index. There was nothing. I really looking at their soil, and the soils were very similar to what we have. In that case, it was like the low 5s. All right, well, you could deal with it, and stuff could grow well. But also, what you don't know is when they give you the buffer, the recommendation. Yeah. You don't know what their target is.
No.
Are they want to go to pH 6 points? It says pH 7.
Yeah.
Or do they want to go to you? I mean, you can do a great thing with you have pH 6.2. Yeah. But are they telling you a recommendation to get you to pH 7 because their computer program just says that? Especially if you've said, "Oh, I have some clover in there." Oh, then all of a sudden the word clover uses a certain equation that comes out with that number. I'm of the opinion we each make our own decisions on our own, with maybe help of advisors, but then you make a decision because it's your farm.
Yeah, and I think a lot of farmers do that. They get their advisors' recommendation, and then they look through it and go, well, make a decision based on probably either their finances or what they think is actually happening in the field.
Sure. Yeah, and ultimately that's the important point. Farmers have to do that, and what I've always tried to do, both in my classes and the discussion groups, and definitely in the books, is to give farmers the tools to do that, and enough tools and enough information so they know that this might be beyond my. I want some input on that with someone who actually knows their stuff, or conversely, I just read this. Does this make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There is a little bit of misinformation out there at this point.
Just a little.
I go on Facebook.
It's pretty hard now for a farmer to figure out what is misinformation and what isn't. Yeah.
And what I try to do is give the principles to the farmers so people recognize, this doesn't sound right. No matter how well known the person is who's saying it.
Yeah.
and because social media is so powerful, you go on Facebook and you go in some of the groups, and I've been on watching, and I usually don't add stuff like regenerative agriculture or some of the other whatever groups. There's all sorts of groups. Someone will ask a question. Here's my thing. This is my pasture. I've had a little bit of trouble with drainage. What should I do? And you'll get 70 or 80 or 150 responses. And they're all two sentences long. Like you can get any subtlety out of it. And some of them will be from big names. People who have big names in terms of writing and whatever else. And I've read them, and I'm just appalled. Firstly, it's like this barrage of stuff. So which ones are good? I've seen some very bad stuff. And often farmers or people who are not trained scientists will see what goes on their farm, and they don't necessarily say, well, your climate's different or your soils are different. That's not going to work. I don't know if it's going to work. I never see that. I just basically say, this is what you need to do. Well, it comes from this worked for me, and they're extrapolating what worked for them to wherever, to North Island. And it might have worked for you in Ohio, but that doesn't mean it. And it's one of the great advances of human civilization, to my mind, in addition to hot showers, and rugby, is the scientific method. Is where stuff is examined in comparison to other things, and very rigorous behind the scenes statistics and all that gets you answers that you can, this is how it worked under these conditions, and those conditions are very strictly defined. That doesn't happen on a farm. A million things change at once. So how do you take this little thread of good information and apply it in a situation that could be dynamic and moving and changing, and certainly different than another farmer's place, 1,000 kilometers away? Exactly. So if I can bring across basic good principles, that helps you make judgments. That's so the 5-day rule, or the types of the Noah's knowledge of the forage growth curve, or some of those things like that. That just gives you more solid background information that helps you when you walk into the feed store, or you're going to buy some stuff, or you hear this newest thing about the best cultivar, best variety of ryegrass, ever.
Yeah.
In the end, do you spend money on it or not? And you can judge your risks.
And it's giving the farmer the confidence to make those decisions and think, like even with your rules, it's like they can put it in their context and apply it and judge it on a smaller scale. And then if it works, they can scale it up. But it's having that, I guess, that ability and confidence to go, okay, I tried it. How did this work in my context? I just need to tweak it more. My farm might be 7 days or something like that, or my pasture curve goes like this at a different time of the season.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Or I've got 4 teenage sons.
Yeah.
That's the reality of the resources you bring to bear of the system.
Yeah.
All sorts of things like that. It's a matter of when I write, I also don't what we call dumb it down. Mm-hmm. You've read some of my stuff. There's some there's some no nonsense chemistry in some of that.
Yes, definitely. And some calculations as well that I've kind of had to go and put into an Excel spreadsheet to try and get my brain around how it works. Yeah.
Well, one of the things when I rewrote these to be published in a book, it's one thing when you write a magazine and you write this thing and then it's gone and you go to the next one and whatever. But when you write a book, it's going to be in front of people for how many years? It's there. Mm-hmm. And I went and checked all those numbers and looked for, or maybe I needed to add an extra paragraph or whatever else. Because, when you're writing a magazine article, you have a certain number of words or whatever. And you have to be able to you stay within that boundary. And maybe a better thing can be made by adding 1 or 2 paragraphs to fully explain something. So I went back and did that for every single one of those things. And, always the idea was I'm not dumbing things down. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to teach. It's not a textbook either. It's not like I'm teaching a graduate level or anything. But that's the conversations that I would be having in my discussion groups as the facilitator. I'd use a whiteboard and, classically it'd draw some stuff, and some stuff that would look like it came out of a university, but everyone's understanding it because it all makes sense. For example, magnesium tetany.
Yeah.
You got magnesium tetany is a problem in the spring usually, or could be in the winter. And animals go down, and it's a problem of lack of magnesium, but it's more than that. It's also driven with the availability of salt. And I have an article in one of my books about that. And that's really interesting because it actually has to do with the ability of the gut to absorb magnesium from across the epithelial wall. And so, life is not simple. There are complexities. But if you understand, at least it's told in a story, then people will remember a little bit of it. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the way that you've told everything in a story definitely makes it easier to digest or like to visualize it in your mind. Because I think, like me, I like to visualize things or see it. I think a lot of farmers are like that as well. So if they can put it in their context, then it's like, okay, that makes sense. Now I know how to use this. And I found that a great way of writing as well.
Well, someone told me, it's like we're sitting across the table. We're like what we're doing right now. And I'm explaining things. That's the way they felt. That's the way that's the way the book seemed. Like I was I was just in a conversation with them explaining something. And that's the way I've enjoyed writing. The one exception to that was that one section in book one where towards the end, where I go through the entire thing on intensive grazing and that was written for a reference book. So it reads like a textbook. Those 30 pages. But that was written for a different audience. Well, it was written for the same audience, but that was the way the book was. That was the way the book was designed. It was the SID handbook of the sheep industry. So, but I didn't talk about sheep. I was talking about the basic principles. Forage is forage.
Yeah, exactly.
Raising Cape buffalo or sheep or goats or giraffes, and so pasture is pasture.
Exactly, and it's definitely, that's why I have it sitting in my on my desk here, is that little handbook. It's great to just refer back to from time to time. And even though you've kind of written it like a textbook, it's definitely not like a university textbook or anything like to go through. It doesn't seem as onerous. It's very easy to understand. I guess a good question probably for Kiwis is when we think of American farms, we don't really hear a lot about the sheep industry over there. Do you want to kind of because you've done quite a lot of work in this, and it's just something we never really hear about?
Well, the sheep industry had reached its peak of numbers, which was about 45 million back at the end of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't hurt that uniforms were made out of wool.
Yeah.
But the way the industry is structured it's dropped. There are a little over 2 million ewes in this country. We have the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, takes their inventory, So what's on hand on January 1st? So there's going to be, ewe lambs. There's going to be lambs and ewes. So you add them all together, you got about 5 million animals.
Yeah.
All right. But there's only 2.5 million ewes. There's yearlings and then there's lambs and a couple of rams, and so it's really small.
Mm.
In addition, we have a couple of things that go on in this country. Number one, we have cheap corn. Grain is cheap. It could be down in Texas. We have basically a lot of cheap carbohydrates out there in the form of some sort of grain or byproducts, like soybean meal and things like that. And I remember one person, I was staying down a little south, down in near Dunedin, and staying there. And we had breakfast one day, and the person asked, "Why the heck do you feed grain to animals? Why are you feeding corn to animals?" And I started to, get defensive. And then I realized, wait a moment. Here it is. We have cheap grain, usually. And if I can take lambs and I could let's say it costs me real cost. I mean, no nonsense cost, the whole the depreciation and insurance, all thing. And you do real cost. And it costs me $1.10 to put on 1 pound of weight. And I can sell it for $1.30. Why should I do it? That's what our feedlots are designed for.
Yeah.
Our feedlots are designed to make money, and they could put on a pound of gain on those animals for less than they can sell it for. So they're going to do that.
You're going to make money, yeah.
In addition, we have a grading system here that's very different than yours.
Yeah.
Very different. You define lamb, like the rest of the world does, in a very simple way. A lamb is a year or under. And you can look at it and see, is it a two-tooth? It's not a lamb anymore. It's a hogget, right?
Yeah.
We don't. There's no word of hogget. Here, a lamb is defined by the break joint.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who are not familiar with a break joint, what it amounts to is you got a carcass that's hanging, all right? It's hanging from the back legs, and you got the front forelegs hanging down. If you could take basically the elbow and break it, literally break it, it'll do one of two things. It'll break like this, like it'll just kind of go like this, so it'll kind of separate, or it will shatter. Well, it shatters when it's bone.
Yeah.
When it goes like this, it's still cartilage.
Yeah.
And what happens is that cartilage to bone transition, the ossification, occurs at 16, 18, 20 months.
Mm-hmm.
A lamb is defined, if that's still cartilage, it's still a lamb.
Okay.
That means that you can have lambs that are 18 months old.
Mm.
Quote, they're lambs.
Yeah.
They will classify as lambs. That means I can get a 120-pound animal, which is heavy already. It's 55 kilos, right? It's 120 pounds, and put 30 pounds on it and still sell it as a lamb.
Man, that's very interesting.
So that means that we call them here old croppers, meaning they were last year's crop, and there's hundreds of thousands of old croppers around.
Yeah.
And usually they're great, and they're usually grazing, and then they go into feedlots.
Okay.
And lambs will go into the feedlots. So you can have, very simply, you can have 14, 18, 16-month-old lambs. But it's unheard of in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And so the system and the politics of the system is driven by the packers and the feedlot owners, because they're the ones that are buying something. Let's say there can be bad news if you get on the wrong side of someone, because it's a small industry. And there's only a couple of big packers in the country. If you get on the wrong side of them, how are you going to sell your animal? If you have a couple of loads of lambs, how are you going to sell them when there's no place to go? So the industry is confined in ways that, fortunately, yours are not.
Mm-hmm.
And also the concept is that the imports, oh my God, imports are the worst thing since they're horrible, right? Well, that's been in the industry since the beginning. What our original organization before ASI, which is the American Sheep Industry, which was made Industry Council, which was made 1990. Prior to that, it was called the National Wool Growers Association. Mm-hmm. The National Wool Growers Association was formed in 1865. At the end of our Civil War, which had been 1861 to 65, the price of wool bottomed out. It went down. And the reason is that Union soldiers had wool. The army had wool garments. Southerners not so much, but uniforms were made out of wool.
Yeah.
Which you have a woolen garment and you're fighting in Mississippi, that's a whole different thing. But nonetheless, wool was a big thing. Well, at the end of the war, of course, like any other war, the amount of wool that was needed dropped off rapidly. So in December 1865, some of the leaders of the sheep industry gathered in Syracuse, New York, to discuss what they can do about it. And they formed an organization called the National Wool Growers. And their main purpose, or their main thing that they were going to struggle for, is to keep out imports.
Mm-hmm.
all right, given the situation, and this was way before we had international agreements and stuff like that, import duties were a big deal. I mean, that was a way also the government raised money. So we kind of haven't changed.
Yeah.
The American sheep industry's basic underlying leadership hasn't changed in terms of their thoughts.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, imports are the worst, even though we're seeing some of the highest prices in history right now.
Okay, that's interesting because we are seeing low prices in New Zealand at the moment for our sheep and beef.
Well, farmers are getting some good prices, but also lamb is real expensive.
Yeah.
And they go to the supermarket, lamb's expensive, and we've got some large, but the percentage of lamb that's consumed, as the percentage of lambs consumed, imports are, I don't know, 70% or something like that at this point.
Yeah, but then.
Which, an interesting point, we had it for many years in the national meeting that would occur every January. There was an economist that came out of Virginia. He was a good economist, and he put up on the board. He'd say, "This is what's happening. This is the amount of lamb that's produced, and this is, look at it, it's going down." Mm-hmm. Because the numbers in the country were going down. So they're going down. And so what you're happening is your pie is getting smaller and smaller, and you're fighting for the largest part of that pie.
Yeah.
That's not the answer. The answer is to make the pie bigger.
Yeah.
So that everyone there's more but they fought against imports bring more stuff in, one way or another. So if McDonald's would finally pick up McLamb, you think that might help the market a bit?
Yeah.
But they can't, because they can't get product.
Okay.
And they also can't, in restaurants, often in American lamb, can't get consistent product. I mean, there are exceptions to this. Don't get me wrong. There's some very, very fine exceptions. But in some respects, I mean, if you have lambs, some lambs are sold at 8-9 months, and some enter the market at 14 months, and you're putting them in the same box, cuts. How do you do that? How does a restaurant be able to handle different size cuts?
Mm.
So, and the thing about it is, we don't have a third. I'm sorry?
They'd have a different flavor profile as well, just the extra aging growth.
Absolutely. Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They do. I mean, people can convince themselves otherwise, but, a 9-month-old animal and a 14-month-old animal, they're both, I happen to personally like Hagen. I mean,
I like Hagen as well. Yeah.
But here in the U.S., that word doesn't exist. There's only 2 classifications. And the thing is, lamb is lamb. Well, it's not lamb, but I mean, lamb is this large thing that up to 17 to 19 months, whatever. And then it becomes mutton. And so you can get, if you're a farmer, you can get $1 at this point, $1.70, $1.80 a pound for lamb and 15 cents for mutton.
Sure.
So there's no in between.
Yeah.
And the concept of trying to change that marketing system or that grading system has been brought up in national meetings, and it has been fought every time. So, it is, well, the numbers of lamb have gone down.
Yeah.
I mean, the numbers of sheep have, and it's very unfortunate because we have stuff to graze. I mean, the sheep, cattle, but and no one's ever mistaken a John Wayne movie for the sheep. So there's a cultural thing going on as well, being the cattleman. But still, it's sad. It's sad because we got 330 million people in this country, and lamb, and I've had wonderful lamb in New Zealand. I mean, it's just delightful. The different cuts, and every restaurant and every market has it, and it is just absolutely delightful. But it's not making really good headroads here, and there's some administrative barriers to the expansion that has been very frustrating. And there's historical and cultural reasons, political reasons. So it's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate.
We also have public land, a lot of, especially in the West, and that land is grazed. You put cattle and sheep on, they're called allotments, and people are able to, and they pay a certain amount to put those animals per month, put those animals on land. And that's set by law. There's some sort of formula, but it's cheap.
Yeah.
And and in the U.S., the federal government and others, it's one cow is equal to 5 sheep.
Yeah.
And that's not because of weight. It's because of intake, because sheep eat more per unit body weight. So they'll eat 3% of their body weight, 3.5% body weight. Cows will eat a little over 2. So it's the amount of feed that's out there, which comes back to how much is out there. But the price on public lands is very low.
Mm-hmm.
So effectively, a sheep is a ewe is one fifth of an animal unit. An animal unit is a cow, so it was 1/5 of a cow. So right now it's about $1.35 a month U.S. So 1/5 of that is what, 25 cents?
Yeah,
27 cents. 27 cents a month to feed an animal.
That's cheap.
Yeah,
We could only dream of those prices here.
there are other costs, of course, but that's what the farmers
obviously,
pay. That's what the ranchers pay the federal government.
Yeah.
You know, if they're on private land, it would be different. It's 5 times as much.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's all sorts. There's structural things built into the American sheep industry that's unfortunate relative to getting lamb in front of people to eat. Essentially, what it comes down to.
And that probably impacts our ability as a country to get lamb in front of Americans as well. Do you think? Yeah, that's very interesting. It's something I never realised, and it's actually quite unfortunate for your farmers.
I wish it was different.
Yeah,
I mean, I've spent my professional life. I mean, since I was in Otrahanga and helping with the wool clip. I mean, I've been around sheep since I've been on farms for 50 years, and it's been. I've watched this industry, the sheep industry, have serious problems. It gets smaller and smaller. And of course, administratively, when professors at universities retire, they don't get replaced. And veterinarians who really know something about sheep love fewer and fewer because there's not the market there.
Yeah.
So it gives you some insights. You probably won't hear any of this, most of this on anything official you get from the government or ASI. But that's my perceptions, and I kind of been around the block within the sheep industry for many years in various ways. And the thing about it, one of the biggest things that are growing right now in the industry. Well, I don't know in terms of numbers, but certainly in enthusiasm, is using sheep to graze in solar farms.
Yeah, definitely. Same here.
And I see that as a major future because there's two things about that. There's two ways of doing it. There are farms that the solar companies, the power companies, come to them and say, "We'd like to put some solar panels on your farm." Okay, and they do that, and then they put a bunch of solar panels on the farm, and then on that farm, the person uses their own sheep or someone else's sheep on their farm to graze around the solar panels. And so the solar panels, the company is paying the farmer a certain amount, like every month, to rent to be able to put those on there. Kind of like having oil wells on your place. I mean, okay, so now you're able to graze. You're still going to graze around that solar panels. That's one model. And on small farms or even large farms, that's nice. But there's a different model as well, which I think is the real future. There are solar farms, big ones, and on those solar farms, they may have, I don't know how many hundreds of hectares. There might be nothing but panels. They're not a small farmer with a dozen panels on there. That's what they do. How are they going to keep down the vegetation? And so what's happening is is emerging the concept of being able to use your flock, or let's say especially wethers or dry ewes, to go out there, take 1,000 and move them through and do it on a contract. Basically, you're doing landscape maintenance. And so instead of producing sheep as the big thing, what you're doing is using your animals to satisfy land customers.
Yeah.
That's a different mindset. It's a different model. But a person can get into that. They don't have to own a lot of land.
Yeah.
They can have their animals and they move around and find ways, and they may not ever have lambs. Lambs are a pain in the neck when you start moving them like that.
Yeah.
At least young lambs are.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, but if you can get 1,000 ewes and move them through a large solar array, and then move them on to the next solar array, a different company, and do this every year. So you've got this cycle. It's like being a shearer. It's like having a shearing crew, but you're using your sheep. So I see that as a future. Because then a young person can get into it. You can't do it with cattle because those panels were not built to be rubbed on with a 500 kilogram cow.
Yeah.
And you won't want to do it with goats, who would climb right up on them.
Yeah, and chew on anything how they can.
But sheep are perfect.
Yeah.
And so if you can get sheep, you can be out there, and you do it with large numbers. So as basically a mowing unit, there's details about it that have to be done. I mean, it's not simple. There's things that have to be worked out, both contractually and engineering wise, in terms of cables and electricity and fencing and the practical stuff of moving sheep into certain areas, and also getting the labor to do it. But all of which opens up a huge possibility, and that's not pasture management. You're not managing. It's not like what I write in my book about how to do a pasture. Basically, you're trying to clean the place up and move on.
Yeah.
And that's the future. That is a future for certain people.
Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity for a young person who might want to get into a farm one day. It's without having to have that cost outlay for the land. Like it's kind of a no-brainer. And if you can consistently do the same solar panel units every year, then you've got quite a good wee business there that you can build up over time.
And the number of solar panels going around our country is exploding.
Yeah.
For good reason. And I'm sure it's happening in New Zealand.
Yeah, it's probably this large through council.
However the finances work on it, but there is land in which forage grows. Something grows. And that has to be controlled.
Exactly.
And what better opportunity there is than sheep?
Yeah, exactly. And that could help build up industry again in America.
It can. And there's all sorts of, they could be dry use, and they could be used at certain times of year. It could be, in our case, it could be, if there are any sort of lambs you usually want some sort of production. And so in which case you want good forage. And that may or may not happen under solar panels. But for dry use, it's fine.
Yeah.
And so there are opportunities. And for someone who wants to get into it or become a partner with someone does, so they got extra sheep, it just opens up some real possibilities of entry and expansion.
Absolutely.
I think we'll see a lot more of it.
Yeah, I definitely think so. A lot of our bigger solar farms that are going in here are all going in with sheep grazing as well as the idea to maintain them and kind of get that productive land still in use at the same time.
So do those solar farms actually own the sheep, or do they do it in conjunction with someone else who owns the sheep?
With someone else who owns the sheep. So normally the solar panel company will probably rent the land or something, and then for, say, 30 years, or rent it for 100 years, or they'll buy the land and then rent it back to the farmer that they bought it off if they live next door, and they'll graze underneath it and have like a grazing contract.
So various arrangements can be done.
Yeah, exactly. There's just plenty of opportunity for people to do it. And like you said, we could even have people here in New Zealand who just go around the solar panels and units and just graze their sheep on it as another opportunity of land that's cheaper to lease. Yeah,
I know some people in California who do that. And those solar panels could be in Nevada. And we're not talking about lush forage out there. We're talking about a little bit of stuff out there. But, something that you can do just fine.
Yeah, and they can clean it up happily enough and move on when it's all done. I guess I've had you on here for quite a while now, and I really appreciate you hopping on. Where's the best place that listeners can connect with you and learn more about your work? We've talked about your books, which I'll put some links to in this as well, but if they want to connect with you directly, what's the best way of doing that?
Well, always a trip to New Zealand is a pleasure for me. Well, I do have a website. It's woodylane.com. Can't be any simpler than that. And sometimes I even update it. I'm going to put more information about my newest book that just came out.
Yeah.
But, people can get in touch with me. I mean, of course, my email is available. I just got a request from Southeast Asia for some information. But we'll see. I am retiring. I am pulling back from doing a lot of active work. I'm concentrating on the books that I'm doing, but I am traveling, and there are, in some ways, if people want to get in touch with me, they can, and we can always go from there. My email, of course, is woody@woodylane.com, and you'll probably put that in somewhere. But and of course, as always with today's world, there's Zoom and WhatsApp, and a good buddy of mine is a faculty member there in Lincoln, and we talk all the time. And my wife has a niece just south in a little village south of London, England, and they talk to each other on the phone all the time, and they're using WhatsApp. It's kind of amazing.
But it works. Great. It's connecting with people all around the world. It's great.
Yeah.
No.
I would have called you, except I'm not sure I knew your phone number. So in any case, through WhatsApp. But nonetheless, this is we live in a different world, and it's a good one to some extent. And the technology allows us to do things that were simply couldn't even think about 25 years ago, 20 years ago.
Absolutely, and it's all just at our fingertips, which is great for farming. You can learn just about anything, but I guess it's figuring out what's the misinformation and running your own lens over things, which you teach about in your books as well.
Well, I hope that the farmers in New Zealand can put up with the fact I use the imperial system of weights and measures, so inches and pounds, and although pounds per acre is effectively the same practically as kilograms per hectare.
And you put that.
Someone wants to do So if you read a seeding rate or a fertilizer application rate or how much forage are out there, and I'm talking about pounds an acre, that's effectively is the same as kilograms per hectare. So that makes it just real easy to not get in your way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to finish up my podcast with three quick questions. So the first one is, if you could have dinner with any person, who would it be and why?
Say that again. If I could what?
If I have dinner with any person, who would it be and why?
Have dinner with any person?
Yeah.
Gosh, that's a good one. I never gave that any thought. Probably the Secretary of Agriculture in the United States, to let them know to kind of open their eyes a little bit to the excitement of running animals on grass, and so they could appreciate it more. I've got enthusiasm for that, and if I could bring that across to a person, and the Secretary of Agriculture has a major power of administration to bring down, through the system, so that all the various heads of the various departments would be much more sympathetic to us trying to raise animals on pasture, and how important and powerful pasture is, especially perennial pasture, to carbon, to all the things they want to do. Capturing carbon, saving land, runoff, soil health, all of which we do with our well-managed pastures.
Exactly. Very important. I think that's probably leads into this next question is, what's one thing would you change about the agricultural industry?
I'd be able, if there was some way of making it more, less efficient for raising corn, and more, when I say efficient, in terms of finances, so that farmers who are raising sheep and cattle can get paid for doing good things on their land.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the things that we can do, I know a lot of research in New Zealand, down in Lincoln and in Massey, is targeted to look at some of those things. But in the United States, a lot less of that. And I think that if farmers are business people, and they respond to money, and if there is some way in which good forage management and could be rewarded in a way that would made it this is good business to do this, I think we'd all gain from it. Certainly us who are involved in the industry, but everyone.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. I'm really interested in like natural asset accounting, essentially. So how can farmers be rewarded for having those positive impacts on the environment and the climate by changing their grazing management practices? So they're encouraged to do it and they're rewarded, and actually the wider community benefits from it as well. So I think that's somewhere we might get to in the next 5-10 years, but it's hard to know where we'll go. Looking back to your younger self, what's one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
To give myself? Not much. I kind of went my own way.
Yeah.
But I grew up where I grew up is a very different place.
Mm-hmm.
Has nothing to do with farms. And I would go back to my high school or secondary school and talk with students. And it would just explain my background and what I've done. And that you can do a lot of different, the arc of your adult life and your professional life, whatever that is, doesn't have to be bound by where you grew up.
No.
Or what your parents expect you to.
Yeah.
And that becoming, an agricultural consultant, there's no one in my family who has any idea what I'm doing. And in terms of our talk, it would be like we would be talking Hungarian. I mean, they have clue, but that doesn't mean it can't be done.
No.
And that you can go your own way, and you can make it work. It may not be easy, but whatever. But you don't have to do whatever other people think you should do.
Absolutely.
And agriculture is the one that we do. And one reason I moved to Oregon was because of the grazing. The land use is very similar to New Zealand. I moved here for that reason, and because I wanted to be involved in the type of agriculture that I felt was ethical and important. And I think a younger person should do the same in terms of what they think is ethical and important, and go that way regardless of what other people are saying.
I think that's a great way. Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great way to finish up this interview. I really appreciate your time today, Woody. It's been fantastic to chat to you and talk to you more about your book. I really enjoy it. I'm looking forward to reading the second one. I'm about to start cracking into that. But thanks so much for your time today and sharing all your knowledge.
My pleasure. It's been a real pleasure to do that and get the electronics to work, and it's been just a real pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks for allowing me to.
Thank you.